We've got a special guest today. His name is Dave Hatter. A little housekeeping before we get started, though. If you'd like to ask a question, please go to the bottom of your screen and click on Q&A, and there you'll have an opportunity to submit your questions. We'll do our best to answer our questions at the end of our webinar. Now, I mentioned our special guest that we have today, Dave Hatter. Dave has an extensive background in technology with nearly 30 years of software development, cybersecurity, and project management. He's currently a cybersecurity consultant with Entrust IT. And Dave has earned just about every industry certification in this field that you can. Maybe the longest business card of designations I think I've ever seen. Dave's a published author. He served on many boards. He's currently a cybersecurity consultant with Entrust IT. Also, he serves on a security advisory panel for Top 50 VPN. Now, you may have heard of Dave's name before. He's a regular contributor on Fox 19, Local 12, and can be heard on 55 KRC's Tech Fridays. Dave is extremely active in the community. He's been the mayor of Fort Wright, Kentucky since 2015, after having served on city council there for more than 16 years. Now, Dave loves to share his expertise in hopes of keeping more of us safe from cyber risks. And with his extensive background, we knew that Dave would be the right person to have here to help us out with security risks and to help protect your assets from cyber theft. So welcome, Dave. It's interesting, Dave, in recent timing, in recent months, just a month ago, back in April, the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, was interviewed on 60 Minutes and said cyber attacks on major financial institutions, it poses one of the biggest threats to the U.S. economy with the potential to cripple the system. And we just saw in recent weeks, we were dealing with a cyber attack that shut down the Colonial Pipeline using ransomware that forced a payment of several $1 million. So, Dave, help us to educate and understand what we can do to protect ourselves from cyber attacks.
Well, first off, Casey, thanks for that introduction and thanks for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I think cybersecurity is increasingly important as our physical and digital worlds become ever more intertwined and more of us spend more time online. So my objectives for today are to educate folks, motivate folks, provide some actionable advice. So when we're done here, you can have this slide deck. It's got a lot of detailed information that I won't go over. I'm just going to touch on these points, but you can have this slide deck. And when you leave this today, you should be able to provide a lot more security for yourself, your family, and your organization. And hopefully we'll have a little fun along the way. I like to make fun of myself. I don't take myself too seriously. And, rather than all those certification stuff, Casey, you can just call me super nerd. So we'll jump right in. Casey touched on this. If you read the news at all, pay any attention to this, we're seeing attacks against our infrastructure. There was a water plant in Florida, the Oldsmar water plant, that was attacked, and they increased the amount of chemicals going in the water. So, it's not just you might have your family photos destroyed or you might have your bank account stolen. As we rely more and more on technology, this impacts our everyday life. So this was a recent story. And I'm going to talk about this a couple times in a couple of different ways here. So the FBI has a website called the IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It's chock full of excellent resources for you as an individual to learn about how to avoid these kind of attacks, and they keep it pretty well updated. And if you think you're a victim of cyber fraud, it's a way for you to ultimately report that you've been a victim of some type of crime or fraud. I thought this was an interesting headline because this site has been around now for almost 20 years. They've reached their 6 millionth cybercrime complaint. Now, and an interesting side note, the FBI has reported several times in the past that they believe only about 10 to 12% of all cybercrime is reported for a variety of reasons, right? People are embarrassed, they're ashamed, it gives their company a black eye, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons why this stuff isn't reported. So if you assume that that number is even remotely accurate, that would be 60 million cyber crimes, right? Versus the 6 million that have been reported. And the other angle is, you'll notice there in the headline, IC3 received more than 1 million cybercrime complaints over the past 14 months. The thing has been around for 20 years and it's received 1 million complaints over the last 14 months, indicating a rapid spike in crime. And to some extent, that's due to the pandemic. You've got more people working from home where their systems are less secure. You have more people stuck at home shopping online, using their cell phone, got their kids online. So it's unfortunately sort of a perfect storm that's really opened up a lot of opportunity for these types of attacks, and the FBI is backing that up. So let's jump right into this. There's a couple myths I want to dispel right away. People think I'm too small or too insignificant to be a target. That couldn't be further from the truth. In many cases, the bad guys know that small businesses or individuals are the easiest targets because they don't have the money, they don't have the skill, they don't have the resources to protect themselves. People say, well, I don't have anything to hide, I don't have anything worth stealing. You know, when you think my data or the data I have access to isn't valuable, that's also not true. And we'll get to some specific stats on that in a second. People think, okay, these attacks are sophisticated, they're technically complex, how can I protect myself? But as you're going to see when we talk about attacks like phishing, in many cases, it's really socially engineering oriented. They're trying to convince you to do something, and they're just using technology as the mechanism to get to you. It's not really always about the technology. As we get more and more advanced devices, everything has a sensor in it, everything's a computer now, your car's a computer, your TV's a computer, your doorbell's a computer. These devices are often insecure out of the box. And even if they're not, if you don't configure it correctly and you don't update the software on it, which we'll talk about specifically here in a bit, you really are creating a lot of new attack vectors for the bad guys. And then finally, cybersecurity requires a huge financial investment. It really doesn't. Again, you're going to walk away from this today, particularly if you get the slide deck, with many concrete actionable items that you can take at little or no cost to you that will make you vastly more secure. So let's jump into that. Why is this happening now? Well, I touched on this a little bit. We have increasing use of technology. Everything is a computer now, and that seems to be the ongoing trend. It's never been easier for the bad guys. In the old days, you might have to spend a lot of money, a lot of capital expenses on hardware and software licenses to build an environment to launch these attacks. Nowadays, you literally can go down to a Walmart, buy a burner gift card that's with cash, go spin up a server somewhere else in the world and launch your attacks from it for maybe 15 bucks a month or less. So it's never been easier or cheaper for the bad guys. Thanks to encryption, things like Tor, in the fact that I can cover my tracks with encryption and make it very difficult for you to figure out where I am, that makes it easy for the bad guys. And then we have things like Bitcoin, right? Virtual currency, Monero, Doge, other currencies you may have heard of that make it easy for them to extort you, ask for ransoms, and because of the encryption, make it very difficult to track them down. So it's the tool set available to the bad guys, and the fact that so many of us are online on all the time and from any number of different devices of varying levels of security makes it very, very easy for the bad guys and opens up more channels for them to attack. And unfortunately, we live in a world where surveillance capitalism is the model that powers much of the internet. I mean, if you think about it, software engineers don't write software for free typically. They're not building all these great platforms and services that we use for free out of the goodness of their heart, right? We're in a surveillance capitalism model where you are not paying with data, or I'm sorry, you're not paying with money, you're paying with your data. You are not the customer, you are the product. And as we have more of these devices that are both explicitly collecting information that we put in and implicitly collecting information, our location, we nerds call it data exhaust. You know, all these sensors and so forth are collecting and throwing off a lot of data about you that you may not even realize. That data is valuable, not only because marketers want it, but it helps the bad guys do things like learn more about you, figure out how to attack you, learn how to impersonate you for other types of fraud they might do in your name. So this free model really isn't free. And ultimately, that's also leading to a lot of what we see today. And, you know, I want to, again, dispel this myth that your data isn't valuable. So this is an infographic that Experian put together, and it shows you what different types of data are worth on the dark web. So when you say, I have nothing to hide, I have nothing to steal, I have nothing worthwhile, why would they attack me? Well, your data is valuable, and in many cases, they're going to attack you because unfortunately, you might be an easy target. But we're going to fix that today before we're done. Another reason why this is happening now is the explosion of Internet of Things or smart devices. Again, I touched on this a little bit, and you'll see I'm not a big fan of these things because in many cases, they're insecure out of the box. People don't understand how to set them up correctly. They don't understand how to make sure that they're being updated when the vendor puts out software updates, if they even do put out software updates. So many of these things are basically coming from China, and you know they're just trying to be first to market. They don't really care about security at all. As more of these things enter our world, as more types of devices become smart, it just creates more opportunity for attack and frankly, exposure of your data. And then I touched on this a bit, the bad guys are just making enormous amounts of money. If you saw the recent story where you had the cyber attack that shut down the Colonial Pipeline, Casey mentioned they got millions of dollars in ransom. It was a $5 million attack. The ransomware group behind that, DarkSide, claims to have made $90 million in 10 months. Think about that for a second, $90 million. Their overhead is virtually zero. They're raking in gigantic amounts of money. And if you go check the news, you'll see these people are rarely prosecuted. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I know that's one of the questions that came in so far. Again, they're able to use encryption. They're able to use virtual currencies and do lots of things to cover their tracks and potentially even point the finger of attribution to someone else. So these guys are making a lot of money. You can see there, Dr. Michael McGuire did a study. He put the value of the cybercrime economy at $1.5 trillion. Another ransomware gang last year, Riot, claimed to have made $100 million. So these folks are making a lot of money. They're rarely prosecuted. And then ultimately, people are the weakest link. People, unfortunately, don't have the knowledge. They don't have the skill, and they don't take this stuff seriously. And again, I hate to be Doomsday Dave. My coworkers actually made me a tinfoil hat. You'll see that here at the end. It's kind of funny. But you really do have to take this stuff seriously. You are a target. They will steal your information. They'll steal your money if they can. They'll use your information to break into your organization or launch fraud in your name because they're making a lot of money and they can get away with it easily. So my goal here today is to make you a much harder target and to help you avoid making a lot of these simple mistakes and to implement the tools that will block a lot of these types of attacks. So before we get into looking at some of the most common threats you're likely to run up against, and then the defenses against those threats, I want to throw out a few guiding principles of security for you. First off, it's impossible to be completely secure unless you get off the grid and live out in the woods somewhere like the Unabomber. You just can't do it, right? And unfortunately, we rely on this technology today. It makes our lives easier. It helps us save time. It helps us save money. And in many cases, is critical to our well-being. So my objective here today is not to tell you to get off the grid. It's, again, to make you a harder target, to help you implement tools and processes that will make you a harder target, and hopefully the bad guys will move along to the next softer target. You got to focus on risk. Yeah, you can spend a lot of time and money on this stuff, but ultimately, if you just focus on the most likely risks, like the smart doorbell you really didn't need, or the smart toy for your kid you bought and didn't realize that it was a giant security hole. There's so many simple things of focusing on the risk, and I'll touch on some of those as we get into the threats. You got to take a layered approach. Just having antivirus software but not updating the other software on your computer is not enough. Just having a firewall and not having antivirus software, it's not enough. You need to take a layered approach so that whichever, if they defeat one defense, there's another defense in place. And again, some of that, frankly, is just education and awareness, which we'll get to. It's just being skeptical and understanding that they will come at you from these different angles. Threats emerge and evolve constantly. You got to be able to adapt. They're constantly changing their tactics. The pandemic has been a breeding ground of new and innovative tactics for them to attack you, knowing that you're probably in an environment less secure than your office might have been, and knowing that more people are spending more time online. Education and awareness is critical. Again, I want to say thanks to my friends here at HCM for the opportunity to talk to you about this today. And you have to maintain an incredibly healthy dose of skepticism, if not paranoia, because they are out to get you. And if you're not careful, they will get you. And if I had more time, I could literally spend an hour and a half just telling horror stories that we see on a regular basis. So as we delve into some concrete threats here, I want you to sort of frame this up in your mind. If you just do these three things, you will be much more secure than the average person. Anytime you receive any kind of message, anytime something seems unusual about your phone, your computer, or anything you're doing online, stop. Just stop what you're doing, take a breath, think about it. Based on the information I'm going to give you here today and access to a lot of resources with much more detailed information than we have time to get in here today, think. Did Dave say something about this? Have I had some other nerd tell me about this? Did I read about it on one of the sites that Dave gave me? Think about what they're asking you to do. Is it unusual in any way? Does it seem like it could be fraudulent, right? And then ultimately err on the side of protection. Stop, think about what's happening, and then don't do anything until you've had a chance to think about it and potentially go out of band to verify what you're being asked to do. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Again, the goal is to make you a human firewall. You hear nerds like me talk about software and hardware firewalls. That's a technology thing. Yeah, those are good. Yeah, you need those things, but we want you to be a human firewall. So let's talk about some of the most common threats you're likely to run up against in the real world. And again, some of these really don't have that much to do with technology. They have to do with people making mistakes, in many cases, innocent mistakes, right? So these graphics I think are kind of funny. I'm not going to read them to you. Password management, password hygiene, credential management. You'll hear nerds like me use these different terms, right? If you don't use a strong, unique password for every account, if you're using a password like 12345, and sadly every year studies are done based on leaked credentials, billions of leaked credentials from across the world, and you can find every year in the top 25 worst password lists, people are still using things like 12345, 123456, ABCDEF, QWERTY, right? And I get it. You know, as you get more and more exposure to the digital world, more websites, more apps you need to use, more passwords to manage, it's a pain. I totally understand how frustrating this is. I'm a human being just like you. But the good news is when we get into the defenses portion of this here shortly, I'm going to give you some concrete tips to help you avoid these problems in the future. I can tell you if you're using the same username and password across multiple sites, you're asking for trouble, especially if you're using a simple password that can be easily guessed, easily cracked because it's something like 124345, or something that I might be able to discover about you by looking at your Facebook page. You are literally asking for disaster. Another huge threat, unpatched software. So you go out and you buy your new Ring doorbell or your smart TV, or you get a new PC or a new phone or a new tablet, right? All these are devices that have software inside them. If you're not regularly updating the software with updates from the vendors. And for example, just within the past 2 days, Apple put out an update for the iPhone and other Apple products with various critical security updates in it. You know, a lot of times when these updates come out, it's because the vendor knows that bad guys are exploiting these security holes. Chrome, the browser from Google, there was just a critical update that came out today. So if you're not installing these updates for this software, you are, again, just asking for trouble. I won't read these stats to you again. I want you guys to have the slide deck. There's a lot of information in here, a lot of detailed information, including links to resources you can use above and beyond this presentation. But just that first stat there, Ponemon is a well-known cybersecurity institute. They do a study every year with IBM. They found that 57% of the security attacks were due to vulnerabilities in unpatched software. The software just wasn't being patched. And sometimes that's, or I would say in many cases, particularly with individuals, people just don't know they need to do it. They don't know how to do it. You know, they don't understand that that new thermostat they got that has software in it needs to be updated. So, you know, the first step is awareness that these devices have software that need to be updated. And then the second step is actually doing the updates. How you do that from one device to another will vary. We'll talk about that in more detail here in a bit. Spoofing. Spoofing is a huge threat. And it's the basis for so much of the other things we're going to talk about here. So I put a definition there from Techipedia. That's a great site that will help you denerdify a lot of terminology and actually understand it in layman's terms. I'm not going to read that definition to you, but basically spoofing is the ability to go out and impersonate something. Could be a website, could be a person. It's never been easier. As a technologist, it's very easy for me to go to a website like Fifth Third or HCM or Target, pick any website and literally copy everything off of it. All the graphics, all the text, all the information, everything, copy everything off of it and set up another website. So, you know, if you think about something like Target, right? I might set up another website and I might say targ3t.com, knowing that the average person is not going to notice that the E is actually a 3 or something like that, right? This is known as a doppelganger or lookalike website. I set that up and then I launch a phishing campaign. I send out emails that appear to be from Target. I mail hundreds of millions of people. The email has Target's graphics in it. It has Target's text in it. It has perhaps the names of real people from Target in it. It looks like it came from a Target email address. It's very simple to send an email and make it appear to have come from another address. And sadly, the same thing is true for spoof phone numbers and text messages. Spoofing is very easy. Sadly, we are in a world today because of spoofing where you really can't trust anything that you get unless you know how to verify it. And depending on what it is, that can get a little tricky. We'll talk a little bit about that. in more detail here towards the end, the defensive section. And again, I'm going to give you some resources that will help you get to the bottom of that. But spoofing leads to attacks like phishing, emails that look real but are actually spoofed and fraudulent. It leads to smishing, which is text-based phishing. Again, very easy to spoof a phone number. It leads to vishing, voice phishing. I'm going to give you a link, and I'm going to encourage everyone to watch it here in a bit, where you can see scammers actually scamming people real time. They will call you on the phone. They'll leave voicemails. They'll claim to be the IRS or the FBI or any kind of thing. You know, spoofing, which really ultimately is a form of social engineering, connects into this. Spoofing is used as a part of social engineering. It's one of the ways that the bad guys are able to take advantage of so many people, unfortunately. You almost can't trust anything. So phishing, I touched on this already. I'm not going to read this long definition to you, but I want to tell you, this is a great website, phishing.org. It's chock full of a lot of detailed information about phishing, including many examples of how to, where you can see real world examples of phishing related messages, and they explain what you should have seen and to determine that it was phishing. So it's going to help you identify phishing in all of its various forms, whether it's smishing or vishing. And it's going to help you defend yourself against it. It's going to help you see the kind of things you should look out for. But I just want to reiterate, these kind of attacks can come in from a spoofed email. They can come in from a spoofed phone call. They could come in from a spoofed text message, or frankly, any mechanism where someone could reach you, a posting on, an instant message on Facebook. Any of that stuff could be spoofed. Okay, so you got to be extremely careful. There are different forms of phishing. Most phishing that's going to impact your average individual is, I'm just going to send out a bunch of emails and say, okay, here's 100 million emails that appear to be from UPS claiming that you have a delivery that was missed. Or it could be a fake job. Could be anything like that, right? You've got spear phishing, which are targeted phishing attacks. Like they may go after doctors or attorneys or pharmacists, or could be anything. But I'm not just going to carpet bomb everyone. I'm going to target a specific type of person. And then whaling, those are very targeted spear phishing attacks, generally where they're going after corporate executives or, high value targets. The term comes from whales from Vegas, right? People of high value where they're going to try to attack them specifically. But again, phishing is a huge problem. It's one of the most prevalent types of cybercrime out there. And you have to be on your guard at all times because the quality of the phishing continues to get better. So I want to show you a couple examples here real quick. So in my spare time, as Casey mentioned, I'm the mayor of Fort Wright. By the way, don't ever run for mayor. I got a year and a half to go and I'm done. Thank God. This is an example of an email I got. Now here's one of the tells. You can see it says it came from me, but it actually came from a Gmail address. So they didn't do a very good job spoofing this. I'm going to show you an example in a minute where it looks like it actually came from my real Fort Wright email address. This went to our public works director. You can see here it's pretending that I want gift cards. They took the time to look up my name and that I am the mayor of Fort Wright, right? And they sent this. Again, there's several tells in this thing. The grammar's kind of weird. The punctuation's kind of weird. But the main tell here is it's not my real Fort Wright email address. Not great, but not bad. This could have been catastrophic. So Joyce Woods is our former city clerk. She's retired now. As Casey mentioned, I was on city council for a long time before I was the mayor. So I've known Joyce for decades. I've lived in Fort Wright my whole life. Joyce has lived in Fort Wright her whole life. And I talk about this cybersecurity stuff with our staff all the time. We do a whole variety of cybersecurity training. We have all kinds of tools in place. But this is a pretty high quality phishing attack that could have led to catastrophe. I know this is a little blurry and I apologize, but basically what you can see, and I'm going to just explain how this went down. Joyce got an email that appeared to come from my dhatter@fortright.com account. That is my legitimate Fort Wright email address. Now the signature block is not quite right, but again, the average person isn't paying attention to that sort of thing. She gets an email, it asks her how much money is in our checking account. She replies to it. It's actually going somewhere different, even though it looks like it came from me. At which point, then they come back with, thanks for the information. I need you to initiate 2 wire transfers for an international payment and a local payment. Let me know what you need, right? At which point, thankfully, Joyce had the good sense to say, this doesn't seem right. So let's go back. Stop. She stopped. She thought about it. We've never, in my entire time involved in the city for more than 20 years, done any sort of wire transfer, certainly not an international wire transfer. We don't do any international business. So she stopped, she thought about it, said, this doesn't seem right. And thankfully she erred on the side of the firewall, protect. She literally then went out of band. She picked up the phone and called me and said, Dave, I got this email from you about wire transfers. What is this about? And of course, at that point I said, yeah, Joyce, this is a scam. Thank God you had the good sense to call me. And, disaster was averted. When that went down, there were literally millions of dollars in our checking account. Hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars could have been stolen. Stop, think, protect. That's exactly what she did here. But this is a fairly carefully crafted phishing mail, the kind of thing that people will easily fall for. Here's another one. I think this is kind of funny. And another email I got. Now, this came to me, to my Fortright email account. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. And you could see we've also set up these banners. So even if an email appears to have come from inside, but it's spoofed, it will tell you that it came from outside. In this particular case, this supposedly came from a law firm. It's telling me that, this attorney is working with my wife. She wants a divorce. Now, if you knew me, you'd understand how that's probably pretty accurate. And, again, the goal here, this is pretty well done, right? This looks legit. The grammar is pretty good. The spelling is good. The punctuation is good. And, they're trying to play on your sense of urgency and desperation here. Like, what? My wife wants a divorce. To click this link, and you can see I highlighted, when I put my mouse over that link, you can see it goes to some clearly spoofed website where they're trying to steal my credentials. I can guarantee if I were to click that, it would ask me to log in to see my, quote, divorce papers, at which point they'd have my username and password. So, that's a prime example of something that's actually pretty good. Here's another spoofed email. This went to my Cincinnati State account. I'm an adjunct there. And I just wanted to show here, they actually used real graphics. They use real text. It's very high quality. People would easily fall for that. Another threat, malware. You've got things like ransomware, viruses, worms. Most of these things have been around for a long time. It's still a thing. You got to be on the lookout for these guys. Internet of Things. This cartoon is quite funny. They expect to have 50 billion devices online by this year and over 100 billion in 10 years. Again, this graphic does a nice job of showing some of the risks. If you're just plugging in Internet of Things or smart devices, you're asking for trouble. Public Wi-Fi. If you're using the public Wi-Fi at the local Panera or McDonald's and you don't have something like a VPN in place, you're literally asking to be hacked. I never use public Wi-Fi ever under any circumstances. I would use the hotspot on my phone. But if you're going to use it, you need a virtual private network. We'll get to that here in a second. And the rest of this is really focused on defenses. What can you do to protect yourself, right? So another funny little graphic. We got all this stuff we've spent money on and technology, and still we have human error. So what can you do? Password hygiene, right? Use a strong, unique password for every site. A passphrase is better. Come up with something that only you would know. And longer is better. Like, I love pizza with onions. You can see there are numbers instead of letters. Assuming someone couldn't guess that about you, that would be virtually uncrackable. But your best bet is to use a password manager. Use something like LastPass. There's some other guidance here. I won't read all this stuff to you. I have resources at the end where you can get information on this, but something like LastPass, an excellent secure password manager, will make it easy for you to create and manage strong passwords across all of your devices. It will reduce the friction and make you much more secure. If you don't take anything else away from this today, multi-factor authentication, or MFA. It's also called two-factor authentication or two-step verification. Microsoft and Google have said turn it on everywhere you can. And basically what it boils down to is when you go to log in, you enter your username and password, and before you can log in, it asks you to enter a one-time passcode. You can see I've got some screenshots of different authenticator apps or text where these codes have been sent. Usually you got 30 seconds to enter that code. That creates a very high barrier. Again, Microsoft and Google have said it'll block 99% of all attacks. Turn on multi-factor authentication anywhere and everywhere you can. You got to make sure you're updating the software on your devices. This is probably the second most important thing you can do after the MFA. Whether it's your computer, your phone, your tablet, your smart devices, you've got to install the updates when they come out. Unfortunately, there's not one way you can do that. You know, how you do it on an Apple tablet versus an Android smartphone versus a Windows PC is different. The good news is there are ways to automate that. It's absolutely critical that you do that. Use some type of antivirus software. Windows 10 ships with Windows Defender. It's free. You don't need to spend any money. That's yet another example. So we've talked about passwords, we've talked about MFA, we've talked about antivirus. So far, everything we've talked about here is free. Yes, you could pay. Yes, I've got some links to sites like ZDNet and CNET where you can get rankings on these things, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with Windows Defender. If you have Windows 10, at a bare minimum, turn it on, make sure it's being updated regularly, and make sure it's scanning your computer regularly. Use a firewall. Windows ships with Windows Firewall. Make sure it's turned on. Be careful about what you download. You know, I mentioned before, we're in the surveillance capitalism model. If you just download any software you come across, it may be either at best adware and at worst a thinly veiled malware. You can see this headline here. Google pulled a VPN out of their store. They're removing stuff all the time, as is Apple, because bad guys will create free software that at best is stealing your information and at worst is some kind of malware. Don't just download the first thing you run across. Don't download the first viral thing you hear about. Use sites like ZDNet, CNET, PC Magazine. I have those linked in the resources at the end to vet things before you download them and delete anything you don't need. Make sure that you're using encryption on your Wi-Fi router at home, WPA2 or higher. Make sure you're updating that router. You can see here on mine, it's set up to automatically update itself. You may or may not be able to enable that, but ideally you're going to want that router to update itself regularly. Backup. Backup is one of the best things you can do. Devices fail. You could get ransomware. Backup is the best defense against those two things happening. There are many, many free options. Microsoft provides OneDrive up to 5 gigs free for a personal account. There are a variety of cloud-related backup softwares available. You can go to the Best Buy and just buy an external drive and plug it in and do a one-touch backup. Back up your data. It's the best defense against failure and against ransomware. You might want to consider a VPN or virtual private network. It will help you anonymize your data. It will make it much more difficult for someone to break into your device if you happen to use a wireless network. Nord is a high quality, very inexpensive virtual private network software. It'll also let you watch Netflix from the UK or other places like that because you can fool Netflix into thinking you're somewhere else. A good way to provide another layer of security. Again, this idea of security, limit your digital footprint. The less information you put out there about yourself, the better, because the bad guys will use the information they find to impersonate you or to create authenticity in their phishing emails. They tell you that, you know, they've got some information about you and here's a password. Well, it might be an old password, but that might throw you off. You might think it's legit. The less information you put out there about yourself, and these are some of the ways you can reduce your digital footprint. Use privacy-friendly platforms and tools like DuckDuckGo for search. Firefox is a web browser, Proton Mail rather than Gmail. Really ditch everything from Google is your best bet from a privacy and security standpoint. There are many things you can do to limit that footprint. Kind of wrapping up here, ultimately, skepticism and security. You got to put it on everything. Almost anything can be spoofed. They will attack you if you're not careful. And that gets us back to stop, think, protect. Whatever you do, anything that's unusual in any way, a message pops up and tells you you're infected, stop, think about it, and protect. Err on the side of protection, go out of band, protect yourself. Here's a list of all the resources I've talked about so far, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions. And you can see there's the tinfoil hat they made for me at the office. And my nickname is Doomsday Dave because I have nothing but bad news all the time, and I'm sorry about that.
Dave, that's a great look, and thank you for all the information. So questions, please submit your question. Go down to the bottom of your screen and click on the Q&A, and there you can submit questions. So Dave, we've got a few questions for you. So first question that we had is, our daughter gave me a friendship lamp for Mother's Day. She has one too. The idea is they are connected by a Wi-Fi, and when one of us touches it, the other one glows to let the person know you are thinking of them. The setup directions say to connect to the lamp's Wi-Fi with your mobile phone, and then a pop-up will take you to a sign-in page where you will select your Wi-Fi network and enter your Wi-Fi password. Should I be concerned about giving this device access to our Wi-Fi network?
Casey, you want to venture a guess on what my answer to that is? No, on a serious note, you know, that I think that's a cool idea, especially in light of the pandemic and the fact that people have been separated from one another and so forth. But I would bet you that product came from China. A few stats for you. Mikko Hyppinen, very well-known cybersecurity expert, likened the Internet of Things, these smart devices, to asbestos. When asbestos first came out, it was like this miracle material, and then we found out it wasn't such a good thing. And his point about IoT is, many of these products are rushed to market. There was a recent study released that only about 46% of companies that build these devices do any sort of security testing on their software whatsoever. Now think about that for a second. So you're plugging something into your home environment. You don't know who's behind it or what their intention is. It's probably not malicious, but you're plugging this thing in. I can almost guarantee it's insecure out of the box. And there are many, many examples of these IoT devices. Big story a couple of years ago was webcams that people put in their baby's room to watch over their baby, and hackers were hacking them and talking to their kids. Kids' toys have been hacked. I don't know about that device in particular. There's not a chance I would put that in my house. There's not a chance I would set that up on any wireless network I had access to, simply because even if the thing is secure out of the box, do you know how to properly configure it to maintain its security? Things like change the default password on it. And then do you know how to update the software? If tomorrow some terrible bug is discovered in that particular product, and believe it or not, Casey, there's a search engine called Shodan that is specifically designed to find insecure, well, not insecure, Internet of Things devices.
Wow.
And guys are going to find that thing, and if you don't keep it updated, you will get hacked. So I would strongly encourage, in addition to using MFA and updating your software, that you use as few Internet of Things devices as possible, unless you understand who's behind them and how to configure them correctly, or you're asking for trouble.
Thanks, Dave. Two other questions, and they're somewhat related. So if you need to answer these separately, great, but they might be a little connected. So one is there an easy way to check to see if all software on my computer is up to date with the latest release, or do I need to check each one individually? That may tie also to, is there a tutorial available that shows how to set up automatic software updates for my various devices?
Well, both excellent questions. And the answer, unfortunately, like so much as it relates to technology, varies depending on your particular platform, like whether it's an Apple device or an Android device or a Windows device or whatever. The good news is, in almost every case, yes. Like, for example, you can go out and do a search. I would encourage folks, if they want to do this, to look for a product called SUMO. It's an updater. You can install it, and it will scan your computer and tell you what needs to be updated. And then if you pay for the full-blown version, you can hit a button and it will attempt to update that stuff. As far as tutorials, yes, got to be careful. There's another thing out there known as search engine poisoning. Sometimes bad guys will attempt to lure you into clicking on a bad link or something by building fake web pages full of terms people will search on, and then try to lure you down a path. But you could go out and do something like, if you go to YouTube, right? Don't search, just go to YouTube and then search for video tutorials on, like, how do I update my Windows? How do I update the software on my Windows? Or go to PC Magazine, ZDNet, CNET, and search for like software updater. Again, you have reputable experts and editors who are vetting this stuff. I have links in that resources page to some of those magazine sites. So it can be done. Depending on the platform, it can be a little tricky, but there's plenty of information out there that will help you get yourself more secure around software updates and getting them installed automatically and that sort of thing for each particular device.
Great, thanks, Dave. Are there specific internet security, and I don't know if this is not specific enough, that you're recommending for home computers?
I mean, I think I get the gist of the question, and unfortunately, that the answer to that is going to depend on do you have like a Windows-based computer or a Macintosh-based computer. But if you have a Windows computer, first off, and this kind of goes back to the software updates idea, you really need to be on the latest version of Windows, which is Windows 10. If you're still using something like Windows 7 or Windows XP, Microsoft does not put out updates for those anymore. If there are any new security flaws discovered, you will not be protected from them, period. So, ideally you would have Windows 10 if you're on the Windows platform. As I mentioned, Windows 10 ships with Windows Defender. It's a high quality anti-malware, antivirus program. You need to make sure that's turned on. You'd want to turn on the Windows firewall. Does it make sense to spend money on yet another antivirus software package like Norton or something? In some cases over time, these things have expanded to a lot more functionality. Like the Norton, I'm going to call it suite. It's not just antivirus anymore. It has a password manager in it, which is pretty good. It'll do some like dark web scanning and identity theft protection type stuff. It's more than just antivirus. So I think on a case-by-case basis, you should try to evaluate what you think you need. And again, rather than take my advice and these things, new packages are coming all the time, I would encourage you to go to CNET, ZDNet, PC Magazine, and see what they're recommending as the best security software for your particular environment. Because once again, you got experts and editors who are vetting these things and making qualified recommendations versus your nerdy neighbor down the street. That's really the best bet if you're not sure yourself, is to rely on these trusted resources and get good guidance from them.
So Dave, can the tables be turned at all? When a hacker attacks your computer, why can't we attack them and then destroy their computer when they're attacking us? Why can't the tables be turned?
Well, that's a great question. And yeah, in many cases, it would be nice if you could figure out where they are and send like a Tomahawk missile through the window or something. But here's the problem with that, Casey. First off, really good hackers. I'm talking about nation state hackers like North Korea, China, Russia, right? They have unlimited budgets. They have unlimited time on their hands. Now, they're not typically going to target an individual like you or me unless we're some sort of really high value target. But my point is, if you really know what you're doing, you can make it extremely difficult to attribute the attack to you. And in fact, you can even make it look like someone else did it. There's a well-known case where a guy who happened to be a nerd like me hated his neighbor. He broke into his neighbor's unsecure Wi-Fi, and he basically downloaded a bunch of child porn to this guy's computer. The FBI shows up, kicks the guy's door in, hauls him off, and eventually, after a whole bunch of forensics, they ultimately figured out it was the neighbor that did this. But so my point is, it can be very difficult to trace down the attackers. In many cases, particularly like law enforcement, they don't have the resources or the skill to fool with that kind of thing. And you'll find even if you go to the Internet Crime Complaint Center that I referenced before, again, I cannot strongly recommend that enough to you all, ic3.gov, it's in the links, check that out. Unless you have a significant crime, there just aren't resources to investigate it. And to answer the question specifically, you might only not have a very difficult time tracking these people down. Many of these, if not most of these attacks come from foreign countries. There's no extradition policy. There's no way to prosecute these people. And in many instances, it is actually illegal. You would be violating the law by attacking them. So there's a lot of things to bring into consideration here. And in general, launching any sort of cyber attack is a bad idea for you as an individual. Don't do it. You're going to get yourself in a lot of hot water. And
I guess the additional advice is be nice to your neighbor. So Dave, thank you for sharing your expertise. We are recording this webinar. So Dave covered a lot of data, and you're going to have access to these different slides, as well as recording in the webinar. So a lot of information that we'll be able to share with you. In addition, be on the lookout over the next few weeks. We're going to be sending short videos that Dave is recording for us on specific topics, such as strong passwords, password management, multi-factor authentication, MFA, AKA 2FA, antivirus, common scams, phishing. So be on the lookout for this great advice from Dave. Dave, thank you again so much for sharing today. For HCM Wealth Advisors, I'm Casey Boland. Thank you for being with us. We'll continue to bring great content to you. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Casey.
Thanks, Dave.